you. I am more tickled than you know to be here talking. I've spoken, I guess, to every Rotary Club and Kiwanis and Lions and around town, but it's a real treat to be able to speak at your own club. But you know, having been in this club for a long time, one of the things I've learned is all the great speakers that come here always seem to be able to start off with a joke. And a joke that kind of releases any tension there might be and leads right into the talk. And I've spent months looking, and the flags just aren't funny. But I did see a cartoon once, so with your permission, I'll just kind of describe the cartoon. There's a lady sitting in a chair sewing what is obviously a Stars and Stripes flag. Now there's two men with three-cornered hats just ran into the room through the door. You know they were running because there's lines coming from behind their backs. And the caption said, "Hold it, Betsy, Nova Scotia just chickened out." So, anyway, my folks started Dixie in 1958 when I was 8 years old. And it was a home business. I had two sisters and two parents. It was a 3-bedroom home without a roommate, so I got the sewing machine and the desk. And so by the time I was 10 or so, they had moved the company out of our home. And my mom would come home at night with the fields, with the stars sewed, with a blue piece of fabric and then the white, and would pass out the fields and the scissors. And while we watched TV, we would cut out the stars. Which brings me to my favorite flag trivia question. Can you tell me how many stars are on the United States flag today?
100.
That's right, somebody's seen my talk. It's 100. There are 50 on each side. And believe me, when you're cutting those stars out, you know when you get to 50, you're only halfway through. Well, it only makes sense given my background that I would have, okay, I'm going to find this on switch here, that I would have developed an interest in flags, especially American flags. And that interest led me to a group called the North American Vexillological Association. Now, in a tribute to our past president, Cy Betts, our word for the day is vexillology. And vexillology is the study of flags. The word comes from about 300 or 600 AD. The Emperor Constantine is said to have flown a purple pennant atop a crossbar on a vertical pole. And it's the first recorded use of a flag device, and it was called a vexillum. So from that Roman word vexillum, we get, for the study of flags, vexillology. So a person like myself that studies flags is a vexillologist. And if you get two or more vexillologists in a room, you have a vexillological association. The North American Vexillological Association is an eclectic group of historians and museum people, preservation, involved in the preservation of flags, the history of flags, manufacturers like me. Basically, we're all the flag nerds in the US and Canada. And we get together once a year in convention where people present research they've done on various aspects of vexillology. So a lot of the information you'll get in today's talk that may be obscure, that you've never heard of, has probably come from NAVA. Now, flags do two things. Basically, they do two things. The first things flags do is they denote identity. Now, if you saw this guy walking down the street with this flag, you would know who he's with, because flags denote identity. The other things flags do is they deliver a message. So, for example, the Gadsden flag from the Revolutionary War had a rattlesnake and the inscription, "Don't tread on me." And the message here was clear, that messing with the colonists was as dangerous as stepping on a rattlesnake. So flags do these two things. And so in our talk today, we're going to kind of show some of the meanings, not just go through the history of the flag and the design, but talk about some of the messages in these flags. Now, while the United States has been called the melting pot of the world, our flag history is more closely associated with British colonization. And the first flag that the British or the English planted when they came to the New World was the English flag with the cross of St. George. It's a white flag, red cross up and down, left and right. And if you ever, just parenthetically, if you ever talk to an Englishman and try to tell him that the Union Jack is the English flag, he'll correct you quickly. Now the next flag has nothing to do with the United States, but it had a lot to do with our talk today. And this is the Scottish cross of St. Andrew. It's a Scottish cross with a blue flag with a white cross from corner to corner. Now, when King James unified England and Scotland, now unified is the word he used, the Scottish used a different word. But when he unified England and Scotland, he needed a way to symbolically show that to the world. And he did that by creating a new flag, which was called the King's Colors. And if you look at this, you've got the cross of St. George, red on a white background, up and down, left and right, and the Scottish cross of St. Andrew, white on a blue field, left and right, corner to corner. And this became the flag of Britain, and recognized and told the world that England and Scotland were combined, unified. Now, one of the things we find in history is when a country gets a new leader or a new government, they'll get a new flag. And this is not just an ancient custom. In the modern times, when Saddam Hussein took over in Iraq, he changed the flag. He took the flag of Iraq and added the words Allah Akbar, which was not especially surprising, but what in the law that created that flag, it specified that had to be written in Saddam Hussein's handwriting. So it was very much his flag. Well, when Queen Anne came along, she did not want her dad's flag. So she came up with a new flag. And what she did, this is called the British Red Ensign. And this flag basically took the King's colors and put them up in the canton, and with a solid red flag. And this then became the ensign, the flag of England. It was used on English ships, was used by the army. This was the English flag. Now, it was under this flag that the skirmish that we call the American Revolution happened. And you're going to get the Pete Van de Butte highly abridged version of the American Revolution. We've been around here, English have been around for about 200 years, and thought of themselves, the British colonists, thought of themselves as being loyal subjects of the crown, do all of the rights and the privileges of loyal subjects of the crown. Back in England, they weren't so sure. Because over here, there's colonists that dress funny, they talk funny, maybe they didn't put their finger up enough when they drank tea, maybe they didn't even drink tea. And so there became a rift as far as whether we were going to be recognized as full participants, if you will. And so this began with words and went to more, and as the friction grew, it became shots were fired, it became a full-fledged war. Now, the period that we call the American Revolution was the most prolific period in the history of the world for flag making. And the reason for this was the way the colonists fought the battles. Very much each town would have their own militia, and the women of the town would make a flag for their guys to go fly under. And if two or more were flying together, or were fighting together, they'd bring their flags. And so there were a gobble of flags that came out. Some that are noteworthy, this one here I love. This is the Forster flag. Now and this is the Forster flag. This is actually a picture of the actual flag. This was probably the first flag used by colonists in battle. And this flag was at the Battle of Lexington and Concord. And Colonel Forster took this flag. What is pretty much obvious if you think about it, they took the British Red Ensign, there it is, and cut off to the end with the king's colors. But then it also, they put 7 on one side and 6 on the other side, white stripes, which then created 13 stripes for the 13 colonies. This flag has survived to this day and is now in a private collection. Another flag from the time was the Continental flag. Now, a major symbol of New England was the pine tree. So this flag, and some people call this the Bunker Hill flag, what they did, there's supposed to be, the majority of this flag is the British red ensign. But in place of the king colors, they put the pine tree. What is the message? We are British. We are flying the British flag. We are British, but we will fight for our New England values and our New England identity. Now, this all worked on land. But when you got out at sea, you had a different problem, because every ship couldn't just have its own flag. And there was a need for a unified flag for the Continental Navy. And when they went to create this flag, history records that Margaret Manning sewed the first flag, and the flag was delivered to a ship in the Philadelphia harbor and delivered to the officer on duty, whose name was Lieutenant John Paul Jones. And Jones wrote in his journal that day, "Today I've had the singular honor of raising the first flag of the colonies for the very first time." Now, the flag that he raised was this one. It's known as the Continental colors. Again, look at the message. You've got the king's colors in the canton. We are British. But then with 13 stripes, the message was, while we are British, we are unified in our struggle for our cause. Now, this was not a message that was lost on the British, because no fewer than 3 British generals, when they saw this flag, wrote in their journals the British equivalent of "oops," because they figured they could divide the colonies and conquer. But this was graphic representation that the colonies were unified. Now, this flag was not just flown by the Navy, it also was flown over land. The first time George Washington raised this flag, he raised it over the siege of Boston. And as he raised it, he said, "These are the Continental colors, a proud symbol of a grand union." Well, when Washington spoke, people recorded. And so from that day on, this flag also carries the name of the Grand Union flag. Now, King George didn't listen. So on July 4th, 1776, we declared our independence from England. However, it took almost a year for this young country to get a new flag. And when it came time for that, it again fell to the Navy. And this new flag was designed by a man by the name of Francis Hopkinson. And Hopkinson was the chairman of the Continental Navy Board. And he designed this flag in consultation with other members of the Continental Navy Board, including a man by the name of George Ross. Now, what's interesting, when we take a look, the Hopkinson family and the Ross families were very close. Francis Hopkinson and George Ross were both Masons, and both families attended Christ Episcopal Church in Philadelphia. So it makes very good circumstantial sense that when they went to make the prototype, they would have gone to George Ross's favorite niece by marriage, a young widow, single mother, who was sewing flags for the Continental Navy already, and of course her name is Elizabeth Betsy Ross. Now, this is the flag that Hopkinson brought to the Continental Congress. Accompanied the resolution. Now, this resolution was a piece of Navy housekeeping resolution that said, among other things, resolve that Captain Rhodes be suspended. Resolve that Captain John Paul Jones be named Captain of the Ranger. Resolve that the flag of the United States shall be 13 stripes alternating red and white. The union shall be a blue union with white stars on a blue union, representing a new constellation. Resolved, resolved, resolved. Think about that flag resolution for a moment. Hopkinson, what's he saying? that this stars will be a new constellation. You know, if you think about what is a constellation, it's a pattern of stars creating a picture that you look at and you dream about. I talk about this when I talk to student groups. I say, what do you do when you look at the stars? You don't think about what you had for lunch yesterday. You dream about what can be. You dream about the future. What will you be when you're in 5th grade? You know, what will you do when you grow up? And that's what you do. That's what we do when we look at the stars. And what was Hopkinson saying? He was saying that this young country that was still fighting for its very existence was going to be a new constellation in the universe of countries, that this would be the one they would all look at and dream about. Amazing poetry, amazing arrogance. Now, the other thing is it's not known whether the Continental Congress that day actually intended to create a new national colors or was merely accommodating the Navy. That maybe the most important word in that resolution is the one that's left out, that it doesn't say, resolved that the Navy flag of the United States shall be going on. Was this a bold move by Hopkinson to get into history? Was it an oversight? Nobody knows. In fact, no one in the Continental Congress thought that the adoption of this new flag was important enough to even mention it in their journal. There was no press account. All we know is from the resolution itself that it's there. In fact, we know that the Army Board kept trying to get George Washington to come up with a flag for the Army. And if you think about it, most countries had a naval ensign and an army would be different. But in one of his last pieces of correspondence back to the Army Board toward the end of the resolution, Washington says, as to the issue of the flag, it is as yet unresolved. He was busy. But an interesting thing about this flag, when you look at it, you got the 13 stripes, and you got 13 stars in a 3-2-3-2-3 configuration. And when you look at this very closely, what you see is the St. George's Cross, up and down, left and right, and the St. Andrew's Cross from corner to corner. This new constellation was not all that new. Well, John Paul Jones left Philadelphia that day with this copy of this resolution and went to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where he oversaw the fitting out of the Ranger, our first flagship. He then sailed under this flag to France, where he received the first salute to this flag ever. And so, an interesting thing though, Hopkinson's resolution didn't come with a picture. The Continental Congress got a flag, but there was no picture accompanied with the resolution. And as the word spread about this Stars and Stripes flag, nobody really knew what it was supposed to look like, word of mouth. So we ended up with a lot of different versions. The most popular version that we see is this one. And in fact, we see in, if you look in encyclopedias, remember encyclopedias? This would be called the Betsy Ross flag. Well, we all know that probably if Betsy Ross made a flag, it would have been this one, the Navy flag. There's no imagination can you think of mistress would have taken it upon herself to change the design. So how did we get this flag associated with Betsy Ross? Is one of the great stories. In 1860, a man by the name of William Kenby, Betsy Ross's grandson, presented a paper to the Historical Society of Philadelphia where he told the story of his grandmother sitting there, and George Washington came to her and said, "Betsy girl, we need a flag." And Betsy said, "George, I'm your girl." And he says, "I've got this idea, and we got 6-pointed stars and stripes." And she said, "Hold it, George, look at this. I can take a piece of paper and fold it like this, cut it one time, make a 5-pointed star. That's the way to go." And he said, "By George, Betsy, I think you got it." And it never happened. There is no evidence that George Washington and Betsy Ross ever met. In fact, the only time George was in Philadelphia was in June of 1776 a month before the Declaration of Independence, and a full year before the flag. But by 1860, the Ross family descendants, the granddaughters, the great-granddaughters, had a really good enterprise going, making little flaglets that they were selling as authentic representations of the replicas of the flag their grandmother and great-grandmother had made, had a good business going. William Canby had gone to an artist in Philadelphia. The newspaper was having an art contest, and so for whoever could draw the best picture of a historical event, and Bill Canby went and told this artist his story, and he drew this beautiful picture of George Washington and Betsy Ross, and doggone it, he won. And then there was this push to restore the Betsy Ross house that was falling down, and this artist took the lead on that, and then they stood around. If school children would give them $2, he would send them a certificate and a plate of this picture, and the picture went everywhere, and the story went everywhere, and so that's how Betsy Ross and this flag got associated. One of my favorites of the other 13 star flags is this one, which is called the Serapis flag, sometimes called the John Paul Jones flag. This flag is especially interesting when you take it for two reasons. Number one, it recalls one of the most famous naval battles in American history. By now, John Paul Jones was commanding a ship called the Monon Richard, a French merchant vessel that had been converted. He had been interdicting British commerce. The British sent out the Serapis and a few other ships to get it. The battle off Flamborough Head was an appalling battle. And Jones' ship was sinking. He pulled his ship alongside the Serapis. They lashed it together. His men went over the rail and fought a hand-to-hand combat and captured the ship. When you capture a ship, you put your flag up, and this is the flag that got flown. Where did this flag come from? Some historians have supposed that maybe this was a design of Jones' own fantasy, a personal flag. But by now Jones was bucking for admiral. He wouldn't have done anything to cause disfavor with the Navy board, and certainly he knew what the flag was. No, this flag was probably made in France with garbled instructions. We have an account of our ambassador Benjamin Franklin describing the new flag to the Portuguese ambassador as 13 red, white, and blue stripes and a bunch of stars. But how do we know this flag? The way we know this flag was on the Serapis is after the battle, Jones and his groups went into Texel, Holland, the port of Texel. And the way they would keep track of the comings and goings of ships as an artist functionary would draw the flags, and this is the flag he drew. But the interesting thing is, even though it had red, white, and blue stripes, even though it had 8-pointed stars, the concept of the stars and stripes was so unique that this artist correctly identified this flag as being from the United States. Now, we won that war, but we found ourselves a few years later again at war with the British. By now, we had 15 states, and our flag had 15 stars and 15 stripes. And this flag became important because of the events to us, because of the events of September 14th, 1814. The British did amass an armada in Baltimore Harbor and announced they were going to bombard Fort McHenry at dusk. General William Armistead was the commander at Fort McHenry, and he had ordered a flag to be made. Army regulations then as now say a garrison flag can be no larger than 20 feet by 30 feet, yet he commissioned a flag that was 30 feet by 42 feet. A giant in-your-face to the British. When he wrote that, he wanted the heading to be reinforced to be able to withstand the rigors of battle. Well, at dusk, the British began bombarding. There was a young attorney on one of the ships that had been negotiating for the release of some prisoners, and he watched through the night. The next morning, when the sun rose, that giant 30 by 42 flag was still flying. And this young attorney was so moved, he pulled out a piece of paper and a writing instrument, and he wrote a poem. We know that poem as the Star-Spangled Banner. Because of that poem, this flag is always known as the Star-Spangled Banner. Now, I know too many of you too much, and I have way more respect for you than to sing to you. But with your permission, I'm going to tell you, a lot of people have never learned or have forgotten that Francis Scott Key on that day wrote 4 stanzas, not 1. We sing one at the Spurs game, but he wrote four. I'd like to remind you of the poem. Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed by the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous night o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming? And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? On the shore, dimly seen through the mists of the deep, where the foe's haughty host and dread silence reposes, what is that which the breeze or the towering steep, as it fitfully blows, now conceals, now discloses? Now it catches the gleam of the morning's first beam, in full glory reflected, now shines on the screen. 'Tis the star-spangled banner, oh long may it wave, o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. And where is that band who so vauntingly swore that the havoc of war and the battle's confusion, a home and a country, should leave us no more? Their blood is wiped out, their foul footsteps pollution. No refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave. And the star-spangled banner in triumph doth wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. Oh, thus be it ever when free men shall stand between their loved homes and the war's desolation. Blessed with victory and peace, may the heaven-rescued land praise the power that hath made and preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must, when our cause it is just, and this be our motto, in God is our trust. And the star-spangled banner in triumph shall wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. I think we should take a few more minutes and just sing the whole thing. This is the Star-Spangled Banner today, because it has survived. It is the most cherished piece of the Smithsonian collection, and this is how it looks today. Through the years, a lot of pieces were cut off and given out away as souvenirs, but this is the way, and it is on display at the Smithsonian Institution. Now, we won that war too, and we found ourselves again growing, and we got to the point where we had 20 states, and there were 20 stars and 20 stripes and 13 stars and stripes, and even an account at the Navy Yard in Washington of a flag with 9 stars. Representative Peter Windover, New York, proposed legislation that would standardize the flag. And that finally did, and it passed. And that the flag would have 13 stripes representing the 13 original colonies, and there would be 1 star for every state. Which brings us to our flag today, the one we call Old Glory, that has 50 stars on each side and 13 stripes. And a couple of interesting things about this. If you were worried because Hopkinson's resolution didn't say too much about how the flag, the government now has a book about that thick telling me how to make this flag. No detail left untouched. Another interesting thing, we all know that the 50 stars stand for the 50 states. What you may not know is each star stands for a specific state. The first 13 in alphabetical order, and each after that in the order in which they were admitted to the Union. Texas is the 28th state, and that is the 28th star at the end of the 3rd long row by the white stripe. I was doing this talk once to a Cub Scout blue and gold banquet, and I did this part a little different. I asked, can anybody tell me which of the stars is Texas? And this kid jumped up and said, the biggest one. And I said, well, no, but I like the way you think, kid. In closing, I'd like to say this flag is one of the oldest flags in the world. And the reason for this is because every time we change presidents, we don't change our flag. This is not Donald Trump's flag. It wasn't Barack Obama's flag or George W. Bush or Jimmy Carter or Ronald Reagan. This flag belongs to the true authority and power in this country. And ladies and gentlemen, that's you and me. And I propose that if we do our jobs by being informed, by voting and then staying on our elected officials to make sure they do what we elected them to do, that this flag and our country will remain ours. Thank you.